In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. That event has long been taught as the day an empire vanished. This was not random. It was a chain reaction, years in the making. Why do great powers seem to endure for centuries, only to unravel from the inside out? The real tipping point in imperial collapse almost never happens at the center. It happens along the edges, and most of us miss it. By the end of this video, you will understand what really drives an empire's decline, and what actually takes its place after the fall. The end of the Western Roman Empire is often imagined as a single cataclysm, but the reality was a slow-motion unraveling. For nearly 2 centuries before 476 CE, cracks spread through the empire's foundation. In the 3rd century, more than 20 emperors rose and fell in just 50 years, and many were assassinated by their own guards or rivals. Civil servants in distant provinces watched as central authority weakened, while local governors in Gaul and Britain declared independence, carving out breakaway states like the Gallic Empire. Administrative chaos deepened as elite officials turned their positions into sources of private wealth, ignoring the needs of the wider system. By the time Odoacer deposed Romulus Augustulus, the imperial government had already hollowed out, its laws and taxes ignored at the edges. Ammianus Marcellinus, a Roman historian, described a world where unstable, ineffectual, corrupt governments replaced the old order. Quick recap: the so-called fall was actually a drawn-out erosion, centuries in the making, not one dramatic event. But if the collapse was not sudden, what forces quietly pulled the pillars loose? That is where the real story begins. Empires rest on 3 pillars: military force, economic extraction, and legitimacy among elites and the wider population. If any one of these weakens, the whole structure begins to wobble. This diagnostic toolkit helps explain why collapse rarely happens in a single blow. Take the late Qing dynasty as a case in point. By the late 19th century, China's population had quadrupled since 1700, yet the number of official posts remained almost unchanged. The civil service exams produced 3 times as many degree holders as there were positions, leaving a surplus of frustrated scholars. Many of these highly educated men, shut out from power, became leaders in rebellions like the Taiping Uprising. Competition among elites intensified, eroding trust and fueling factional splits, with Manchu bannermen against Han officials and reformers against conservatives. When the 3 pillars, military, extraction, and legitimacy, are all under strain, the empire becomes brittle. Quick recap: a system that overproduces elites but can't absorb them is already primed for crisis. Next, we'll see how this model helps decode the financial cracks that follow. In the aftermath of World War I, British Treasury officials faced a problem that couldn't be solved with military might or imperial decree. By 1920, the United Kingdom's public debt had soared to nearly 160% of GDP, the highest level in its modern history. Interest payments alone consumed nearly 2/5 of the national budget. Tax rates climbed, squeezing both the wealthy and the working poor, while inflation eroded living standards and destabilized the pound. These were not abstract numbers. They shaped every decision in Whitehall. The government struggled to fund basic services, let alone maintain a global network of bases and colonial administrations. The fiscal strain forced hard choices: cut spending at home, raise taxes further, or scale back overseas commitments. As a quick contrast, political debates raged in Parliament, while the real limits of empire were being set by balance sheets, not by speeches or battles. The numbers told a story before the headlines did. Next, elite officials would have to decide who and what to sacrifice to keep the system afloat. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union's leadership fractured. Politburo voting records from 1987 to 1991 reveal over 20% of members breaking ranks, an extraordinary shift for a system built on unity. Reformists, hardliners, and regional bosses each pushed their own agendas, convinced they could bend the rules without breaking the state. Plenum minutes show roll call deviations climbing as figures like Boris Yeltsin openly defied Moscow. Gorbachev's perestroika didn't just stir public debate, It exposed rifts at the very top. Decisions that once sailed through now stalled or reversed, as officials hedged their bets, unsure which faction would survive. Meanwhile, the Soviet military, still vast on paper in 1989, faced growing uncertainty. Orders to suppress unrest in the Baltics and Caucasus met hesitation or refusal. The chain of command frayed as generals weighed their own futures against the chaos in Moscow. KGB dispatches and plenum transcripts from this period capture the mood. Confidence draining away, the old monolith splintering into rival camps. Decades earlier, the Austro-Hungarian Empire faced its own unraveling. By summer 1916, demands to fight on multiple fronts left the empire's logistics in crisis. Quartermaster ledgers from Vienna show rail tonnage to the Eastern Front dropping up to 50% below basic needs. On the Italian front, artillery units received as few as 12 shells per gun per day, barely 5% of pre-war levels. Food rations for frontline troops fell from 3,500 to under 1,800 calories. Generals and ministers blamed each other, but the numbers told the story. The system could no longer sustain the war it had chosen. In the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire's grip on the Balkans crumbled from the outside in. Serbian and Bulgarian uprisings, once isolated, spread like wildfire after 1878, when the Congress of Berlin confirmed their independence on paper. Local leaders, once loyal to Istanbul, turned nationalist, raising new flags and collecting their own taxes. Ottoman officials watched as entire provinces slipped away, their authority ignored or openly mocked. The empire's borders, once defended by military garrisons and bureaucratic decrees, became lines on a fading map. A pattern repeated. At the edge, power evaporates first. In the Balkans, Ottoman governors defected or were overthrown, leaving the sultans in Constantinople surrounded by shrinking territory and growing doubt. The loss of these regions was not just a matter of land, it meant lost tax revenue, fewer recruits, and most damaging, an open question about who truly held power. Fast forward to the spring of 1945. In Nazi Germany, the collapse began not with tanks in Berlin, but with silence on the airwaves. Allied monitoring reports show Nazi radio output plummeted by 82% between late 1944 and March 1945. Goebbels, once the master of mass persuasion, admitted in a March 29th directive that the people no longer believe our communiques. Internal surveys confirmed it. Regular listenership to the main propaganda station fell from 60% in 1943 to barely 15% by April 1945. The regime's narrative, once its strongest weapon, now failed to reach even its own citizens. When borders dissolve and beliefs evaporate, collapse rushes from the periphery to the core. But as these old systems fall, the question shifts. What fills the vacuum left behind? After formal empires dissolve, the machinery of governance and commerce rarely disappears. In 1947, when British India split into two new states, nearly 80% of the Indian civil service stayed on, carrying their ledgers, routines, and even the same legal codes into the new administrations. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire's legal framework, the Justinian Code, remained the bedrock for centuries, shaping courts long after imperial banners fell. Across Eurasia, merchant caravans continued to follow Silk Road routes, paying tolls to new rulers who simply adopted the old fee schedules. Trade records from Samarkand show that even as dynasties changed, the same goods, silk, spices, precious metals, flowed along familiar paths. Quick contrast. While borders and flags changed, the gears of bureaucracy and trade kept turning. The supposed vacuum is mostly a myth. What actually persists is the infrastructure of daily life. But when these inherited structures face new instability, the story takes another turn. Civil war erupted across the ruins of the Russian Empire. In 1920, the front lines between Red and White armies shifted almost weekly, with control of cities like Kiev and Omsk changing hands multiple times in a single year. Warlords, foreign intervention forces, and breakaway republics all claimed authority as the old imperial order vanished. Maps from this period show a patchwork of rival governments and no clear center of power. The chaos was not limited to Russia. Across Eurasia, new actors pressed their advantage. In Japan, reformist statesmen, once on the empire's periphery, pushed through the Meiji Industrial Revolution. Between 1890 and 1913, coal output soared from 1.2 to over 21 million tons, and steel production increased tenfold, fueling a modern navy and industry. The instability of imperial collapse created openings for ambitious states to rise. As old borders dissolved, the world became a contest of emerging powers, each vying to shape the next order. The multipolar reality was forged not by design, but by the scramble to fill the void left behind. Today, no global order is permanent. Power always shifts, often quietly. As new alliances form and old structures fracture, the lessons of imperial decline shape every negotiation and every risk. The next transformation won't announce itself. Are we ready to recognize the signals before they become history? Share your thoughts below.